Hi, my name is Purvi Modi, and I am the head of counseling at Inside Education. Today, we're going to talk about whether or not you should consider taking the SAT or ACT. The first thing to do when you're trying to decide whether you should take the SAT or ACT, and if so, yes, which one, is to do a diagnostic test. We strongly recommend our students come in and do a diagnostic for the SAT and one for the ACT at a very similar time frame, so within a month, because that way we're getting a really great baseline measure. Then we can go through the test together and figure out where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, and does it make sense for you to actually prepare for the test? I know it can feel like a bit of a pain to think about 2 tests, 4 hours each, 8 hours. You probably don't want to do that. But long term, it's going to save you an incredible amount of time, and it's going to save you an incredible amount of stress because you'll be able to zero in on the one test where you should really focus. Now, with changes happening, more students are asking, should I even take the test? Right now, there are very few schools that aren't even accepting the SAT, meaning that they're test blind. And until you have that final college list, we don't know which those schools are going to be. So if you're a sophomore or a junior and you don't know your final college list, you should still think about taking the SAT, because that way you're not preventing yourself from later applying to schools that you're really excited about. And we don't know how the rules will change around testing moving forward. So the better prepared you are now, the longer in the long term you're going to save time and stress and hopefully be best prepared for the colleges you'd like to apply to. People often think SAT and ACT is just one thing you do to apply to college and just think about it in that one myopic sense. But really, taking these exams are going to give you some incredible skills long term. So these tests are originally designed to test your ability to analyze material and to also just make sure that you have some basic knowledge as it comes to grammar, critical reading, and math. Long term, if you are applying to go to graduate school, business school, law school, medical school, any kind of graduate program in anything, you're very likely going to have to take a standardized test. So one, taking the SAT or ACT now is going to give you an understanding of what that test will look like long term. Also, if we really think about it, a 4-hour-long test is going to help you build up your stamina for taking exams. And within that 4-hour-long test, critical reading is a fundamental skill that you need to have in life, no matter what career you plan to pursue. Even if you plan to be an engineer and you hope to never read another book in your entire life, you still need to know critical reading, because you're going to have to read articles and really dissect, data and research and information that's out there. So the critical reading piece is exceptionally important. Grammar. We talk about grammar on a day-by-day basis. I'm correcting my own children with their grammar because the ability to communicate effectively is a skill that you're going to need to have no matter what career you're pursuing. So really, these skills are really valuable for you to have. It doesn't hurt to think about these exams and try to think of them beyond college. Think about, how can I use this to learn? And how will it help me throughout my life? And if you do that, hopefully it will become less of a chore to prepare for these tests, and you'll feel more excited about what you're actually learning. So there's so much new data that's coming out with the class of 2021, and especially as it comes to schools that were test optional and some schools that actually went test blind. So far, the data seems to show that taking tests was still really beneficial, that students who took tests had a slightly higher chance of getting in. Now, here's some stuff to really think about. The data is still coming out, so I want to be really clear that I don't want to make major decisions before we've had a chance to analyze all of the data. But it is important to know that the rules can change. While some schools have already decided that they're going to be test optional for class of 2022, they haven't made decisions for class of 2023 and beyond. And so that's still something that we want to think about. So if you're a sophomore right now, I would still think about prepping for your SAT this summer so that you're ready no matter what. I think one thing I can say with certainty is that SAT and the ACT are not disappearing in your time in high school. They're still going to be around. How they get used in college is what we're still don't know yet. So for schools that are test optional, the way that we think about it, the more positive information that you can show on your application, the better. The other piece to think about is relative to your peers. Do you believe that you go to a school where many of your peers are still going to be taking the SAT or ACT? Well, if yes, you want to make sure that you're competitive with them. You also want to think about your major. Are you applying for an exceptionally competitive major? biomedical engineering, computer science, even psychology? If so, will having a standardized test give you a little bit of an edge? Because again, you're able to show data about yourself and things that you're able to do well. I will tell you that, this is a case-by-case decision. It's not that I'm telling everybody to take the SAT. It really depends on the kinds of schools that you'd be thinking about down the road. Depends on how you've been doing on diagnostics and whether it's worth your time to take the test. So the most important thing I could tell you is do some diagnostics. See where you stand, and then help you make a decision about what's a better long-term strategy for you. As of right now, many schools have already decided that they will continue to be test optional for the class of 2022. And some have even stated yes for class of 2023. There are some schools that haven't made a final decision yet. And some schools, like the University of California system, have said that they will continue to be test blind. So there's so many different possibilities out there. What we are telling our current juniors, if they still need to take tests, try to have a test, because we don't want their college list to be limited by the schools and their test optional policies or not. We want them to apply to schools that are the best fit for them, that they're excited about. And later on, we think about the test optional, test blind piece of it and whether or not we submit test scores. But we don't want any of those juniors to suddenly feel pressure in the beginning of their senior year. Oh my goodness, I didn't think about the SAT. I should go take it now because I'm recognizing I need it for my major. All my friends are taking it. The schools I'm looking at, even though they're test optional, the data is showing that kids who submit a test had a better chance of getting in. Think about it now. Try to prepare for taking the exams now. And that way you have more choice when it comes down the road. For students in the class of 2023, same thing. We don't know exactly what's going to happen for your grade and your admissions process. Better to be better prepared, cast a wider net, and that way you have more choice when you apply to college in 2 years. The UCs made the radical decision to go test blind for class of 2021. We knew that that was going to be a possibility for 22, 23, and definitely for 24 and 25. But with the change, there was a huge increase in the number of applications to the UC system. Now, they have already committed to being test blind for 2022, 23, and 24, and with talks of creating their own test to use starting in class of 2025. Could things change and they introduce that test a little bit earlier? Perhaps, creating a test actually takes an incredible amount of time and research. It would be exceptionally difficult for them to be able to introduce that test much earlier. But in order to call the admissions numbers, they might introduce something so they can start to be more thoughtful about how they go through their admissions process. But for students who are 2022 or 23 and even 24, we can assume that the UCs will continue to be test blind and that they will not be looking at the SAT or ACT, and subject tests are no longer a thing, so we don't even worry about those. The question being, should you even think about the SAT or ACT if you are not planning, if you're only applying to schools that are test blind? I will tell you, I think it is very premature to have a final college list. And whether if you're a junior, I think it's still too early, and juniors will be the ones closest to having a final college list. So I wouldn't plan to not take the test because you think you're only applying to the UCs, because when they went test blind, the entire population of who applied, the demographic of who got in completely changed. And I am recommending to all of my students that, yes, you may apply to the UCs, you may be excited about them. You cannot rely on the UC system and knowing that you'll definitely be going there, that your list should be expanded to apply to schools outside of the UC system simply so you have more choice. As a result of that, many of those schools probably are test optional. So you want to make sure that if you can have a solid test score, have that as part of your application process to increase your ability and, again, show something positive in your application. When you build a college list, you should be thinking about things like location, program, class size, cost, all of these different factors that will go into your experience and whether you will thrive on campus. You should not build your list simply based on test score. Now that so many schools have moved test optional, it's actually one less thing for you to worry about. If you can have a great test score, awesome, put it on your application. But don't think that just because you're not great at testing or you haven't gotten the score you want, or maybe you haven't even had the time to study for what you want, the test you'd like to take, that you think you should only apply to schools that are test blind. Don't do that. Focus on schools that are going to be an overall wonderful fit for you, developing a balanced college list. And when you've done that, then you take a look at the testing policies, test blind, test optional, etc. And you make sure that that list that you include is really comprehensive and is giving you the best chance of getting into a school you're excited about. Don't not apply to schools because they're test optional and you don't have a test. Don't only apply to schools that are test blind unless that's truly the list of schools where you believe you're going to be happiest, most successful, and it is a balanced college list.